Greetings and welcome to the Sunday service for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola. Our physical building sits conveniently located to the Florida Panhandle and the Alabama Gulf Coast area, and yet in today's world we're delighted to be able to welcome you from wherever you choose to join us. I'm Reverend Alice Syltie, and it's my honor and pleasure to serve this congregation, a congregation whose mission is to celebrate diversity, strive for justice, and inspire love. Welcome. It's good to be together. For our chalice lighting, I share these words from the Reverend Dr. David Breeden. We tender this flame, opening the book, turning to a page yet to be written, opening a story yet to be told. May we fill this fresh page wisely. May we write a new story into being. May we together inscribe the page with hope. The day unwritten. I bring us into this time together this morning with these words for reflection. Wooed into this world by the Reverend Scott Taylor. Who dreamed you into being? What stories sat in their heart as they imagined what you would become? Who helped you imagine your story? Who helped you see your place in the story of the world? And what matters most, who helped you understand that you could be the author of your own unfolding? All of which is a way of asking, who listened? Who listened until you could hear yourself speak, until you trusted the voice that is your own? And what about those stories of others? Those kept in cramped spaces of silence for fear of how hard and narrow this world of ours can be. Who needs your listening so their story can be set free? Whose story needs held in your heart so it knows it is worth entering into the world? We say it is about listening, but really it's about love. It is through affection that our stories are born. They are wooed into this world. Never forget that, nor this. It is through loving the stories that we discover they love us back. Please join me in the words to our church covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. In the spirit of community, we light candles to share the significant milestones and transitions in our personal lives. These candles reflect those many joys and sorrows, whether we have been able to speak them to one another or not. Today, I want us to remember that one of these candles burns for Jill Cicero, who lost her mother recently. So our thoughts and prayers are with Jill and her family. As always, there are joys and sorrows that remain in our hearts, yet unspoken, and one candle glows for those.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, 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 whoever you are, condemned, worshipper, whoever you're leaving, ours is no caravan of living, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, cover you are, condemned, worshipper, whoever you're leaving, ours is no caravan of living. Come yet again, come.
Following a most interesting evening at a Bedouin tea house, we went back to our hotel to catch a few hours of sleep before our 1:30 a.m. rendezvous to head over to St. Catherine's Monastery at the base of Mt Sinai, where we were going to begin our climb. A few minutes after gathering, we pulled into the parking lot where lots of people just like us were pouring out of vans and buses, walking into the darkness toward the mountains up ahead. I am on this trip by an invitation to join an intentionally interfaith group of clergy with some grant money to study and travel together over a period of about 3 years. We were a rabbi, one Methodist, one United Church of Christ, UCC, 2 Presbyterians, a Baptist, and me, the Unitarian Universalist. Even though I didn't know these people, I was invited because they knew the Unitarian Universalist minister would be open to an intentionally interfaith experience. It took a year to plan what we would do with our money and our 3 years. Away from the buses, it got very dark, and some people turned on flashlights. The worst thing was the people who had those headlights strapped to their foreheads, and every time they turned around, they would blind me. We actually had those with us, although most of us weren't wearing them that night, because we thought we might be crawling through Hezekiah's tunnel, which we were told was dark and wet and nasty, and we would need both hands free to keep from falling. From the first mention of that, I thought, no way, but didn't know if it was going to be something really important or not. As I began to realize that some of the planning did not include the greatest choices for activities, I began to say no to some of the suggestions. That was one of them. I was beginning to wonder if this middle-of-the-night mountain climb might be another one. From the headlights in my eyes, I knew I was not with an experienced group of night hikers. I was thinking about my experiences with trust walks at our Unitarian Universalist camp in North Carolina, the mountain. We pretty much have a covenant there that when you're walking at night or stargazing, if you need a flashlight to walk, you keep it aimed down at the ground on your feet so as not to blind anybody else or ruin the brilliance of the stars that they're watching. Up ahead was a crowd gathering, and our guide, Ahmed, pulled us aside and said, "We will stay together going up the mountain." We talked about a word that we would use to call out to one another if we got separated. We joked about a few possibilities, but actually never agreed on one. As we approached the crowd, Ahmed began to talk to one of the Bedouin people. After a minute or two, a man came over and took Cheryl by the hand and led her off. She looked back, a little nervous, and I asked into the silence, "Where are they taking her?" Then I saw the camels. Various men came and led each of us off in a different direction to get on the camels. At this point, I realized I was going to have very little control over what happened next. None of the Bedouin people seemed to speak English, and my colleagues had all disappeared from sight. I was wishing that we had nailed down that word. I climbed on the camel, it rose to its feet, and before long, I was in a line of people on camels headed into the darkness. People were also walking alongside of us on the path, trying to avoid being knocked over by a camel. I noticed that the path split, and I had no idea which path my friends were on. A little ways up the path, I heard David Freeman call, "Alice, is that you?" I looked back and I was most relieved to see him riding on a camel behind me. I rode along feeling much better now and began to relax and enjoy the ride. The flashlights went off after one of the camel herders yelled, "No lights." Apparently it blinded the camels also. I realized that would be a very bad thing. As the path got narrower and looking down to the left, I noticed my camel was one wrong step away from going over the cliff. I looked down to my right to make sure the man holding the reins of the camel was paying attention. To my horror, I saw that no one was holding the reins of the camel, and the man I was trusting with my life was nowhere in sight. One very slow camel with a young boy was in front of me. Occasionally he talked on his cell phone. I think his parents may have been on a camel that took the other path. Other camels and their riders occasionally passed me, and the people walking had to be very careful. They usually didn't realize until too late that no one was steering the camel. They gave us some very unkind looks. I was glad that my camel chose to stay behind the slow camel and that David's camel stayed behind mine. We didn't talk much, just an occasional exclamation about how beautiful the stars were, or that we noticed the temperature was dropping as we got higher in the mountain. I tried not to look straight down, but it was breathtaking to look back at where we had come from. On the way to the mountain, Cheryl, one of us, had a conversation with me about what she thought this trip might be like. She was out of breath just climbing the hill to the dining hall, so she wondered how she would make it up the mountain. I thought, if this is a regular stop on the tourist route, it can't be that bad. Then I remembered that a week before, Bob said that he had been in training for the climb. Rabbi Jeff wasn't feeling well, so he didn't join us. Later, the guide thanked him for not going. Cheryl and I talked about trust or faith in the process, but I didn't really recall any process for deciding to climb this mountain or how we would climb it. Somehow it just appeared on the itinerary. Whether or not to ride camels was some last-minute decision or vote. So as I was looking over the cliff, I tried to think about what I would put my trust in order to enjoy this unique experience. I knew it was an opportunity of a lifetime. If I survived it, I knew I'd be glad I came. If I spent the whole trip worrying about it, even if I survived, I would have wasted the opportunity. And if I didn't survive, it wouldn't matter anyway. About the only thing I could do differently was to get off the camel and walk. But then I would not be able to sit back and enjoy the stars and the view, the quiet simplicity of just sitting and riding. Later, I remembered something I heard Holly Neer say at a presentation I attended. She said, if you have a choice between fear and fascination, choose fascination. I told myself that the camels did this every day, and if they had a habit of falling off the mountain, someone probably would have told me, or I would have read it on the internet. I decided that an awful lot of people were here with me doing this, and even if I hadn't done my homework and learned all about what I was getting myself into, surely some of them had. And then I decided to trust in the mysterious peace that I felt as I relaxed into the gentle rhythm of the camel's walk, tilting my head back to look up at the thousands of the biggest, brightest stars I'd ever seen, shining against a deep, dark background of sky. And as I did, I had the feeling that I was sharing a moment out of time with people who lived thousands of years before me. I felt the power of a story, of people wandering in that very wilderness with a leader who climbed that mountain some 3,400 years before to receive guidance for the congregation he would lead to the promised land of freedom. We rode the camels about 2/3 of the way up the mountain. It was still dark when we arrived at a narrow, level place along the path. People were getting off the camels. You could stop here for something hot or cold to drink. I realized I had not seen any water closets on the way, so I decided to err on the side of dehydration. Finally, all of us arrived at this spot, and it was the first time I had seen everybody since we got on the camels. We regrouped and followed the crowd up the path, which narrowed and became much steeper. Cheryl did indeed feel like she was losing her breath, and we stopped often to rest, calling ahead to the others to wait. I don't really remember when I noticed, but at some point the others were out of sight, and Ahmed and I were walking with Cheryl, resting frequently. Cheryl said maybe she should just stop and wait till we came back down, and we said, no, we can't leave you here alone. We continued on, and when the first hint of light came, she asked me to please go ahead and so that she wouldn't feel bad about making me miss the sunrise. The top was in sight, so Ahmed stayed with her, and I went on alone. I climbed over to a flat area from which a lot of people who decided they had gone far enough were watching for the sunrise. It was crowded and I couldn't find a good spot, so I went on. I decided that if I had come this far, I might as well complete the trek. Close to the top, I found Robin and Bob and David. They pointed me in the direction of the best spot for watching the sunrise, which was happening at that moment. The spot, which had a wall around it, was also too crowded, and I saw one man sitting on a big flat rock by himself. There was room for me, so I climbed up and caught the sun as it came up from over the hills below. I sat there for about 15 minutes, took some pictures, enjoyed the view, and then looked around to find the others. They were already headed down to go to breakfast. I hadn't explored the top of the mountain yet, and Cheryl had just made it up there. So we took our time before we headed down. We had a full day ahead of us after the hike back down the mountain, so there wasn't much time to reflect on the experience as a group. By that evening, we had driven to the Taba border, walked across with all of our luggage, and started phase 2 of our journey in Israel. Since that time, though, I've had questions about the meaning and purpose of our climb. Was each individual's experience of seeing the sunrise what was most important? It seemed to be the goal once we got off the camels. It never occurred to me to hurry up a mountain until I got to the top and realized I was not where I needed to be for the best view. Or maybe for some it was the accomplishment of climbing the mountain, or simply standing in the spot designated as the place where Moses spoke to God and received the covenant. My main question is what might have been different about our experience if the goal had been to climb the mountain together. It's definitely a constant question for intentional communities. What's the purpose of our coming together? Why? Why do we do this? What is the task, and what are we here to accomplish? In our Unitarian Universalist leadership schools, we focus on the balance between task and relationship. We've learned that ignoring the relationship usually sabotages the task anyway. So how do we balance accomplishing the task with maintaining relationships? That's a question we answer in part with agreements and covenants. When Moses climbed that mountain all those many years ago, he received instructions for the Israelites who were waiting for him to return. He was up there for over 40 days, and they grew impatient waiting. The story is that when Moses returned and found them worshiping the golden calf, he became so enraged he broke the tablets, and before long had prompted the Levites, who apparently were the only ones who lined up on the side of Yahweh, to slay many of the misbehaving Israelites. Once he calmed down, Moses had to go back up the mountain and talk God into calming down and get some new tablets with the commandments that the Israelites would need when they set off for the promised land. I guess wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years without any guidelines for behavior and no pharaohs to whip them into shape was more than Moses wanted to take on. The wilderness in which the Israelites wandered is often used as a metaphor for times of change and confusion. I'm not sure that in this rapidly changing world we are not always in a time of confusion, and therefore always in something of a wilderness. But this year takes the cake. I felt whiplash this week as the CDC guidance for COVID changed so dramatically from one moment to the next. New information changes our orientation to the world, and now we can receive up-to-the-minute accounts of world events and discoveries several times a day. The ability to respond thoughtfully to change or new information requires time to reflect. We know that some people have been going about their lives as if nothing had changed, while others have strictly adhered to legal as well as suggested restrictions and guidelines. One article pointed out that as lockdowns lift, many people who were unable to leave their house are now going out and enjoying life as best they can, while still being mindful of safety. Yet for some, going back out and mixing with other people is a concept filled with fear and anxiety. Despite vaccines and a decrease in disease prevalence, some people experience what scientists call COVID-19 anxiety syndrome. We are reminded that a pandemic is not just a medical phenomenon. It affects individuals and society and causes disruption, anxiety, stress, stigma, and xenophobia. These are wilderness experiences because they require adaptive behaviors and reflective responses. My clergy colleagues and I did not have a plan for how to climb the mountain. We didn't make a covenant to climb together. We didn't know the terrain. We didn't have a vision for the experience, nor did we check to see if we even had a common goal. And I'm not saying that we should have. The goal of the clergy group was to study together, travel, and learn, not to build community, although the quality of our relationships certainly had bearing on the ability to accomplish the overall goal. There have been other groups that broke up before they even finished designing their study plan. And there were people who left ours during the planning process and were replaced by others before we took our first trip. Knowing that we were a diverse group from the start, we planned modules in the beginning to facilitate better understanding of the differences among us. We invested time in building a working relationship. Growing and maturing personally and spiritually was built into our goal. For us to do this, we had to each act from our own particular faith perspectives. That means we may have approached relationships from different perspectives. I have wondered, though, what our guide Ahmed thought about us. The reason he thanked the rabbi for not coming along was because Ahmed had his hands full running back and forth to take care of all of us individually every time we got into a tricky spot. Going down was harder for me than going up because it was steep and the rocks and the sand were slippery. Ahmed said that for smaller people they tend to slide more easily, so he stood near to offer me a steady hand when that happened. In his book, Reason and Reverence, the late Dr. Bill Murray, Unitarian Universalist minister, writes, "To be religious is to be engaged in a process, a joyous, lifelong process of growing and deepening. As the story goes, the law was handed to Moses by Yahweh, and in turn he handed it to the Israelites. The agreement to accept and abide by the law was the covenant that the people made with their God. Maintaining the discipline of keeping that covenant is a process of growing and deepening for the Jewish people. When I reached the top of Mt Sinai and sat on the mountain, I listened carefully for God to give me a covenant for Unitarian Universalists. But the voice I heard said, 'Alice, you are a UU minister. I cannot impose a covenant on your people. In fact,' she said, 'I thought you all might help me.'" A covenant invites people to be a community in a particular way. As Unitarian Universalists, we have accepted no law handed to us from an outside source. The covenant we make is born of our highest ideals, values, and principles, articulated, spelled out, and written down as a constant reminder to ourselves and others that the quality of our relationships is an aspect of our religious life. Honoring our connections to one another while at the same time affirming our separateness is part of growing and deepening in emotional and spiritual maturity. It is in that spirit that we covenant with one another as people, asking the question, how shall we live together in the wilderness? What promises, covenants, behaviors will we offer to one another while we live, search, and experiment in the midst of change and uncertainty? Our own story as the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola continues as we wander through the adaptations that will be necessary to honor our covenant with one another and with the principles and purposes we affirm as Unitarian Universalists. May we be gentle and compassionate with one another as we tread this path.
At the start of any given day, there is mystery available. There is a game waiting for an open heart to say yes. Here I am, I'll play. And if we're smart, we'll listen to the way, and all the misery that held us down, we'll let it fade. Let it be outshined by a simple spark of a life that's waiting to be made. It's waiting to be made. What will you make of this day? What will you keep? What will you change? What will you see? What will you believe? What will you make of your dreams? Will you keep sleeping, or will you awaken and decide what you will make? At the start of any given day, there is history and poetry. There is a play, but you're not in the audience. You are the star. So get out there and say what you will make. What will you make of this day? What will you keep? What will you change? What will you see? What will you believe? What will you make of your dreams? Will you keep sleeping, or will you awaken and decide just what you will make of this day? What will you keep? What will you change? What will you see? And what will you believe? What will you make of your dreams? Will you keep sleeping, or will you awaken and decide what you will make?
Before my closing words, let me remind everyone about our Zoom congregational meeting happening today at 12:30. You should have received a link for that meeting, and I look forward to seeing you there. I close with this quote from Terry Pratchett. There's always a story. It's all stories, really. The sun coming up every day is a story. Everything's got a story in it. Change the story, change the world. May it be so. Go in peace.